Boys, day 4, MSQ, Dawntrail, and our story has arrived. It has happened. It has got there. Oh, man, I had a huge session yesterday. Played for about 9-ish hours of just pure MSQ and things got changed. Let's talk about pacing. Because I think this is a legitimate criticism of Dawntrail. We've been very focused on, like, character development, where they are, where they're going, what's happening with those, how they're growing. Like, they're very, Wukelamat's immaturity. Now Wukelamat is maturing and events are happening. But let's talk about the pacing of it, which I think is probably a really good criticism of where Dawntrail is right now and why they might be doing it. Because this isn't a company that's inexperienced with storytelling pacing by any means. So why is this happening? So let's give some context to this. We are, where I am now, which is where we're going to get to, obviously, is much deeper into the events of becoming the Dawn Servant than we've... It got really quick. Even though we did play for 9 hours, it got really quick. And the prime example of this is Wukelamat's power creep. Power creep is somebody who has started relatively weak sauce, I suppose, and is now very, very powerful. And Wukelamat has an extraordinarily large power creep jump in a very short space of time. And once again, similar to like we had with the Reeds, this led to a huge amount of debate as to whether this is appropriate, inappropriate, whether you like it, whether you dislike it, all that kind of discussion. And it was a big deal. So what happened? Let's give context to people who aren't playing the story. Wukelamat, earlier in the story, bumps into Bakul Jar Jar, who is the big two-headed Mamool, the big beast. He is the contest winner entry. He's not a sibling of Daddy. He's the 4th entrant, and he is like the wild card entrant. And during that period of time in the Hanu zone, Wukelamat races back because Bakul Jar Jar is about to do something horrible to the Hanu. Lots of words we're learning here. And leaps into the air with her giant axe to come crashing down onto Bakul Jar Jar. And Bakul Jar Jar just swats her away. And in fact, in the process, breaks her axe with his sword. He's just like, Ping, you are useless garbage. Get the hell away from me. You are no possible physical match for me in any way, shape, or form. Just tosses her aside like she's leftover hot dogs. Then, the next time them two face off is actually in the MSQ a little while later, where she solos Bakul Jar Jar, and you play as Wukelamat. You take over, and you play. Not only does she solo Bakul Jar Jar almost unharmed, but also defeats 50 men at the same time. It's a solo duty where you're fighting Bakul Jar Jar, and there are men flooding into the arena, and you're just AoEing and cleaving them down, blah, 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 and you fully solo him. And that's obviously a very large leap in power. Now, it feels very sudden, but only to some people, I think. Only to some people. So what do I mean by that? In canon, Wukelamat is alongside you for all your exploits. Now, of course, the MSQ isn't very combat focused, but you are doing 2 dungeons and a trial by that point. You have done the 2 dungeons, and you have defeated Valigamanda alongside her. Certainly if you do it with the NPCs, she's there and she's fighting, which is a lot of combat skill growth, for sure. It absolutely is. However, if you played with other players, that's not your kind of contextual experience. You have to remember, it's like, well, in canon, this is what would have happened, and she would have got better. We also have a scene in between there where our other brother, the focused head of the Landsguard, also just absolutely claps Bakul Jar Jar, which decreases his power level. We kind of get this impression at the beginning of the story that Bakul Jar Jar is an ultimate fucking badass, but he's not. And now Wukelamat has gained confidence and stuff. So from that perspective, it kind of makes sense. However, if you didn't play with them, and there isn't that much combat that goes on in the MSQ outside of the trial and the dungeons, is it can feel like, wait a minute. Suddenly she's Superman and she's like taking on like 100 men and she's taking on Bakul Jar Jar at the same time. And it feels a little out of place. And you're like, oh God, okay. And I said, like, sometimes, and this is an example, right? And again, there's all pieces that fit into this jigsaw. This is why it's raising debate and not just like, this is flat out stupid, right? There's a difference between this just is really dumb and, okay, I see what they're saying here, like this. I might not feel that way, like I didn't, But I get it. I get what they're trying to say, right? I understand it. And you're slotting into pieces like, okay, I see what they're trying to say. I don't quite feel that way. It feels a little undeserved, but I get it. And sometimes Dawntrail's biggest crime so far, we're 95 now, to give you context. So we're, I guess, halfway through the MSQ. It feels very, very long and drawn out, and also feels rushed at the same time. And both things are true. Both things are true, depending on what you're doing. So I would say the first 2 zones are very long and drawn out. Like, there's an excessive amount of time spent doing a trading quest where you're picking leaves off the floor, or you try to convince people to buy these things to learn about the Pelu Pelu. Okay. And the Hanu Hanu zone can feel a lot longer and drawn out. It's like, oh, we're going investigating reeds, and then we're going checking this out, and all this kind of stuff. And then it starts to increase in pace. It starts to accelerate. And then it also seems to accelerate to the point where things are happening extraordinarily quickly. And the prime example of this will be the 2 things that also happen here. We discover that one of the leaders of Dawntrail, I think I'm getting the names right. There's a lot of nomenclature to learn, is actually the biological father of Wukelamat. And this is a revelation that the leader expresses to you. Is like, I just want you to let you know this dark underbelly. And I was like, oh, okay, the FF14 Ishikawa vibe is starting to show itself. The Whirlit vibes are trying to show themselves, and obviously this actually deepens shortly. As he pulls us to the side, he's like, I just want to know about her. Because when I was younger, we were at war with the people down in the valley. And when she was, I think, 6 years old, she had been pushed into a ceno, which is a deep hole in the ground, and she couldn't get back out. And people said it was an accident, but I knew better. She knew better. She would not have fallen into this thing. Somebody pushed her into there. So for that reason, knowing that my daughter's life was at risk in where I lived because of the conflict that was happening, I sent her away to live with Daddy, who raised her because I trusted him. He was the Dawn servant. He was uniting our people in a tremendous way. This was a good man. So I made a decision, as he was my close friend, to send her away to live with him. And I've just been watching from afar, and now she might even be... She was destined to become the leader of our little village because she was my daughter. However, now she could become the leader of all of Thrall, and I'm incredibly proud of where she's at now. And I don't want her to know, because she considers him to be her father. And it might muddy her or confuse her or something like that, or might just, you know, there's a lot of implications that happen when it comes from children who were abandoned rediscovering their biological parents. And this is a very relatable. A lot of, and not to me directly, this didn't happen to me, but this is something that has been tackled time and time again in the real world and in fiction, of what happens when children that are abandoned or did not know their parents or were, say, through IVF or some sort of sperm donation, something along those lines, who eventually want to meet their biological parents. And that meeting can go in myriad ways, to use FF14's terms, you know, all the way from, like, I literally did this anonymously because I needed money or whatever at the time. The whole deal was that you wouldn't know who I was. I want nothing to do with you, blah, 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 all the way to, oh my God, I abandoned you all those years ago because I was a teen pregnancy. There was no possible way I could have looked after you. You would have had the most miserable, horrible, potentially deadly life with me. I was, you know, a drug addict and all those kinds of things. And horrible things happened that led to your birth. So it was better that you were raised by someone else. But now I'm in a better position, and I had no way to find you, and you found me, and love and reconnection. And it's a really interesting... I'm not sure how many of you, certainly in other nations, have access to Doctor Who, especially a new season of Doctor Who, which has actually been extremely good compared to the weaker seasons in the past. And I'm a sci-fi nerd, so I've been watching it. And this is something they tackled in there towards the end of the series. I won't spoil how it goes, but it was very well handled. It was really well handled and actually very heartwarming and touching. As to having all these different points of views where seasoned, veteran, wise people, even into the thousands and millions of years old, were saying it's probably not a good idea to find your biological parents. And yet the devotion of the child, the love that one feels for a biological parent, drove the person to go through it anyway. And what is the end result of that? I won't spoil it, but it was handled very well. I thought this was kind of appropriate to talk about. Again, as always with the TDPs, providing you some homework and maybe some entertainment along the way. The new Doctor Who series is pretty good. It's not fantastic, but it's fine. It's pretty good. So this is then immediately, and this led to yet more debate. This is actually overheard by one of Bakul Jar Jar's assistants, and Bakul Jar Jar immediately captures her biological father and then reveals it in essentially the next cutscene. Like, this is something you would... And this is where it's a case of gamifying your thought process. I immediately had the same reaction and then sort of rethought about it, is that when something like this is revealed, like this secret, this tidbit, you can almost, as an amateur, at best, writer, imagine this is going to be a piece of information they're going to hold for quite a while, and then towards the end, maybe even when you forgot about it, they're going to bring it back. So, obviously, we're after the Yu-Gi-Oh cards, the gym badges, whatever you want to call them, to become the Dawn Servant, is when all of them have been collected, Bakul Jar Jar is going to rock up and be like, and here's your father, give me all your Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and or I will kill him. This is your biological father. But they didn't do that. They, in fact, revealed it next time, which then led to the debate. And I took this on board, which is good. In fact, we had a big debate yesterday because people were getting a little angry at how much people were typing, but everyone was being relatively civil. And I said, guys, I'm all about that. We do never want to create an echo chamber. If you've got a lot of different points of views about a relatively intricate story, talk about it, because it worked for me. I was like, okay, this kind of makes sense. Bakul Jar Jar, who's headstrong and rushing forward, and his assistant's just giving this information, and they're literally right there with both of these parties, immediately utilizes it to his advantage. And I was like, you know what? That kind of makes sense, actually. That kind of makes sense. It's like, he's got the smoking gun. He's going to use it to advance himself, because that's what he's all about. He's just released a nuke, essentially, in Valigamanda, which was a great fight, by the way. Some people are probably asking. I think that was really cool. I got hit by one avalanche, which was a bit of a bummer. But I'm very much looking forward to the X, which we will be doing. And used it immediately. And I was like, oh, I thought they would let this breathe. That was what I said. I thought they'd let this breathe for a bit and have a speculating and stuff. And it's like, they don't need to make you speculate about everything. There's already the Golden City, Solution 9, Erenville, all this kind of stuff. That's all stuff you're speculating. They don't have to have you speculating about literally everything, right? So I was like, okay, this is fine. Which then leads to the scenario we talked about earlier with Wuklamat. So that was great. The other example, where it can feel a little rushed, so that one was fine, was the actual going to the hometown of Bakul Jar Jar, where we discover the origins, and it got really dark, and I was like, yeah. Now we're getting fucked up. Now we're getting messed up. Where we meet his father and mother, and they won't even speak to us, because these people who live down in this valley, this jungle forest, hate outsiders. They hate their living conditions. They detest the people who live above them, because they live in sunlight and they live below a canopy. They've been bombarded by meteorites. They can't grow any crops, all this kind of stuff. And it then gets really dark. So I don't think this is something I need to warn you about. If you're here for FF14 story, you're used to dark things. As it turns out, they've essentially been doing eugenics. Because long ago, when they were trying to fight the Uplanders, the Highlanders, it wasn't working out until two of the tribes, which should not have been able to breed between them, did. And they produced this whopping great two-headed Mamool. And he was super powerful and led them to gaining some ground and victory. And so they were like, well, this is the play. So we need to produce loads of these. So it's not explored. And this is where I was like, okay, this is something I don't care about the trade quest in Pelu Pelu. I do care about this. I want to know more about this culture. And maybe it's explored in side quests, which we'll do after the MSQ. But I want to know is like, did it become almost law that you weren't allowed to pair up with somebody of your own tribe / race, right? Did they force you to be paired up with someone of the other tribe to increase the odds of producing the two-headed Mamools? Did they, in fact, enforce breeding programs where they were forcing people together, much has been seen in the past historically, in order to produce more children to just increase the odds? And why aren't there loads of them around? Which we then discover is that only 1 in 100 of these children survive. The rest of them are encased in a jar and sunk beneath this temple where no one's allowed to go. And there are... It doesn't say a number, but they've been doing this for generations and generations, and it's, your estimation is it's in the thousands of dead children that are lurking beneath these waters down there. And I was like, oh, cool. kind of cool for storytelling reasons, not in real world, but for storytelling, I'm like, oh god, okay, now I see it's coming through, and I was like, okay, we're there. The story's happening now. We've established the characters. We can go. And I was like, oh my god. However, we resolve it in 10 minutes. Which is, again, it feels a little rushed. Is we bring in Kona, the science man, and Wuklamat's negotiation skills. And Bakul Jar Jar is now somewhat sympathetic. But I want to talk about that a little bit more. So we resolve the problems of the zone. We're going to get seeds from Charlian that the Gleaners went and found when it was the Exodus. And they're going to bring them over because they have seeds that will grow just fine down here. We'll be able to provide food, and, you know, you'll be able to get more sunlight and things like that. And you'll live a happier life, and you no longer need to do eugenics. And everybody just universally agrees immediately. And it's like, hey, it's all good. But they did start messing around with the moral implications and the ethics and the aftermath. Again, not to get too dark and heavy in this, but again, there's a relatable stories in the past. Is you've got these people who have been promoting eugenics, and certainly Bakul Jar Jar's father, who's been the head of this, and takes full responsibility. And Wuklamat is still that naive person who's like, okay. And she talks to the Warrior of Light, and she's like, what do we do here? Because Bakul Jar Jar has unleashed Valagamanda, who is essentially going to murder and kill potentially thousands of people. Has threatened to kill my father, has done all these things, right? Has done all these horrible, horrible things. However, I now understand why. And the reason why is that because he was one of the hundreds of dead babies that managed to live, the entire culture, his entire country, essentially, bestowed upon him the desperation needed that he win and become Dawn Servant to get them out of their plight. And that has been instilled in them since the day they could understand words and been raised that way. And his entire people, and until he does this, they're going to continue to kill children. Literally. And it has to stop. And the only way to stop this butchery that's happening is if he wins. That's the goal, that's the purpose. So there's a sympathetic edge to it, which I've been looking for, this morally grey area. And it's like, do the actions justify the means? Now you have some context for why this person is behaving this way, why that's happening that way. And Wuklamat is like dealing with that and comes to the Warrior of Light. And you can kind of leave her to try and muddle through it. And she does, shockingly errs on the course of naivety. And it's a really interesting discussion because this also kind of ties back to like what some of the Nazi scientists did, which they, at the end of the war, they were brought into the Allies, despite the horrors and things they had done, and some of the horrible things the Japanese had done to human experimentation, all these things. Yet these people were brought into the Ally encampment and protected, and new identities given because their knowledge and value could actually serve, despite the horrific origins of it. And it brings all these things up in me. It's like the horrible, disgusting things that have happened. Yet, is there a use for this from a practical standpoint? And if you've never read the book World War Z, I recommend you do. It's nothing like the movie. The movie is just the title. Absolutely nothing to do with the book. I'd recommend you read that because it talks a lot about these people who had to make horrible, disgusting, yet practical decisions, which are unforgivable, right? Unforgivable crimes that had to happen, at least in the eyes of everybody involved, because the outcome would be preferable. And, you know, not good, but preferable. And these kind of things are all brought up, but it's done very quickly. Now, again, coming back to the pacing thing, it's done very, very quickly. It's done in over a course of 10 minutes to leave you with the thought afterwards, right? Depending on how... I imagine if you just consume the MSQ like a little piglet like we do as MMO gamers, then you might not think about it as much, but this is certainly stuff I've thought about because I've had overnight to consider these things and think about it. And I was like, what do you do with these people? You still need a leader in the form of her father, of Bakul Jar Jar's father. You still want a leader of the people. Now we oust people immediately, ideally, if they've been caught doing anything. But now it's like, we're changing directions. We're all on board with no longer doing the eugenics program. So we still need our leader and people to guide us because they're the leaders. And we still look up to them. And we all understand why this happened. So we need to go this way. And then they decide to make it a secret that it happened. It's like, I will take full responsibility. The people don't need to bear the horror that I pushed as the leader. Even though we all agreed. But I will bear the responsibility, and this is to be our secret that we take to our grave. Like, we will move the bodies, and they will, because they sealed the bodies up inside a temple, which is kind of where I'm concluding today, because it's my next stop, is a dungeon, as it turns out. Dead baby dungeon. I don't know what's in there. I got to the dungeon as I had to finish the stream. I was like, okay, God, I can't go inside. But I haven't got time. But I really want to. And people are really mad, and I'm really sorry. But Dead baby dungeon is our next stop, which is the actual doorway seemingly to the Golden City. So coming back to the pacing thing then, which is the topic of today, it feels like they needed the first half of the MSQ, like I said with 95, to establish all the Dawn Servant stuff and Wuklammat, and we're now the only only person who's even contending for the throne, I think, because Konor's dropped out. He doesn't believe he has what it takes to compete with Wuklammat, so he's dropped out to help Wuklammat and join the team. Our other brother has been disqualified, and Bakul Jar Jar doesn't want it, so we're the only contender. I still think she's going to put her brothers alongside her, maybe even Bakul Jar Jar now, as the Dawn Servants, plural. I still think it's going that way, but we have all the Yu-Gi-Oh cards, we have all the things, and we're going to the Golden City. I have a bet with my stream, 50 subs, which is a lot of money, that the Golden City is actually just a gateway to somewhere else, and the people who visit the Golden City travel off somewhere else. I don't think Solution 9 is on the planet, and I think we're going to bring it to the planet, because we did see in like one of the sneaky trailers is that Solution 9 was above an area. I suspect that it's just like a Stargate that takes you to another shard, another planet, something along those lines. So we shall see. But I just wanted to talk about pacing. I'd love to see your thoughts on it, because the general comments on these videos as the story progresses have been mostly very, very good at discussion, which is what I like to promote. I don't want an echo chamber. I can be wrong and have been wrong many, many times. It's totally fine. So, look forward to tomorrow. Bye, everybody.